What happens when prejudice collides with power? For Amara, a successful black woman, stepping into an upscale boutique should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, she was met with hostility, assumptions, and outright racism from the staff. But Amara's story doesn't end there. With grace and resilience, she turns the tables, teaching an unforgettable lesson about respect and humanity. A gripping tale of self-worth, accountability, and the quiet strength it takes to stand tall in the face of discrimination. This is a story that will leave you inspired to confront bias and demand better from the world around you. Subscribe today for more powerful narratives that shine a light on injustice, celebrate resilience, and inspire change. The soft chime of the door echoed as Amara stepped into the upscale boutique, the rich scent of leather and polished wood filling the air. Her fingers traced the edges of a sleek, black leather handbag on display, exactly the one she dreamed of owning for months. The price tag made her hesitate, but she took a deep breath, telling herself that she deserved this. The money she had worked hard for was hers to spend, and this bag, with its intricate stitching and smooth texture, was a symbol of everything she had achieved. She stood there for a moment, taking in the polished surroundings. The boutique was quiet, almost too quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the gentle shuffle of footsteps. Amara was the only customer in the store. She picked up the bag, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She had worked late hours, sacrificed weekends, and spent years proving herself in a world that often overlooked people like her. The price tag, several times more than what she'd normally spend, was steep, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. She had earned it. With her purchase in hand, Amara made her way to the cashier, a young white woman in her late 20s who had been quietly folding shirts at the counter. The woman looked up briefly, her eyes scanning Amara from head to toe before she straightened her posture, giving an almost imperceptible sigh. "Is that your purchase?" the cashier asked, her tone a little too sharp for a simple question. Amara nodded, setting the bag down onto the counter. She didn't think much of it, but she couldn't shake the sense that something felt off. The cashier hesitated, eyeing the bag for a moment. Then, without any further preamble, she spoke, her voice louder than it needed to be. "You better put that back," she said firmly. "You might not be able to pay for it." The words hit Amara like a slap in the face. For a split second, she was frozen, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. She glanced around, searching for some indication that this was a mistake, that the woman was speaking to someone else. But no one else was there. The cashier's eyes remained locked on her, unblinking. "I said, put it back," she repeated, a sense of finality in her voice, like it was a foregone conclusion. Amara could feel the heat rising in her chest. It wasn't the price of the bag that stung, nor the insinuation that she couldn't afford it. It was the underlying message, "You don't belong here." That her success, her presence, was somehow an anomaly in a store that catered to a certain type of customer. And that type didn't look like her. For a moment, she wanted to shout, to confront the cashier and tell her how far she'd come, how she'd fought through the subtle racism that marked every step of her life. How she had worked twice as hard, smiled when she didn't feel like smiling, just to prove that she was worthy. But instead, she took a deep breath, slowly exhaling through her nose. "Excuse me?" Amara said, her voice steady but filled with an edge that hadn't been there before. "What did you just say to me?" The cashier shifted, looking a little nervous now, but still, she didn't back down. "I just think you might not be able to pay for that," she repeated, her voice almost defensive. Amara's eyes narrowed. She was used to people doubting her, used to the low hum of discrimination that followed her wherever she went. But today was different. Today, she wasn't going to let it slide. "You don't know me," Amara said, her voice quiet but firm, a calm resolve in her words. She leaned forward slightly, meeting the cashier's gaze with unwavering confidence. You don't know anything about me, and you certainly don't know how hard I've worked to get to this point." The cashier blinked, taken aback. She opened her mouth, but Amara raised her hand slightly, signaling for her to stop. "I'm buying this bag because I've earned it," Amara continued. "And no one, has the right to make me feel like I don't belong here." For a moment, the cashier stood there, speechless. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward. Amara felt the tension in the air, but she didn't break her gaze. Slowly, the cashier's hand moved, reaching for the bag with a slight tremor. She paused, looked at Amara for a moment longer, and then, without a word, rang up the purchase. Amara handed over her card, watching the cashier process the transaction, her movements now slower, almost hesitant. When the receipt printed, the cashier handed it over with a tight-lipped smile. There was no apology, but Amara didn't expect one. "Thank you," Amara said, her voice smooth, almost casual. She picked up the bag, its leather cool against her skin. She turned to walk away, but just before leaving, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. "I hope you learn not to judge people based on the way they look," she said quietly. "You never know who might be standing in front of you." The cashier didn't reply, but Amara didn't need her to. She walked out of the store, the chime of the door ringing in her ears, a small victory playing in her chest. Outside, the sun was bright, the air crisp with the promise of a new day. Amara stood for a moment, letting the warmth of the world wash over her. She had faced a moment of doubt, but she had come through it stronger than ever. The bag, now safely in her hand, was more than just an accessory. It was a symbol of her resilience, a testament to everything she had overcome. And no one could ever take that away from her. A few weeks passed before Amara found herself walking back into the boutique. She had almost forgotten about the incident with the cashier. The sting of those words had dulled over time, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing she stood up for herself. But that day she was back, with a different goal in mind. This time, she wasn't after a designer handbag. She needed a gift, something special for her mother's birthday. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, the familiar scent of leather and warm wood greeting her. The boutique was just as she remembered, sleek, polished, a little intimidating. But today, Amara felt confident, like a woman who had every right to be here. As she browsed the shelves, picking up scarves and delicate jewelry, her mind wandered back to the encounter that had unsettled her weeks ago. Would she run into that same cashier again? How would she feel if she did? A few minutes later, she was at the counter, holding a beautiful silk scarf she had chosen for her mother. And there, behind the register, was the same cashier. Her heart skipped for just a moment, but then she reminded herself, "It's been weeks. You've moved past it." The cashier looked up as Amara approached, her eyes flickering with recognition. A brief, almost imperceptible pause passed before the woman's face broke into a warm, practiced smile. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice soft and polite, not the sharp tone from before. "How can I help you today?" Amara paused for a moment, wondering how this would unfold. The woman's expression was friendly, almost eager. She seemed like a completely different person than the one who had questioned her just a few weeks ago. "I'm just picking out a gift," Amara replied, placing the scarf on the counter. "It's for my mom's birthday." "That's a lovely choice," the cashier said, ringing up the scarf with an almost careful delicacy. "Your mom will love it." Amara nodded, watching the woman work, her hands moving smoothly as she scanned the item. There was no tension now, no hesitation. The cashier was polite and efficient, her earlier behavior nowhere to be found. Amara wondered what had changed. Had she learned something in those few weeks? "You're doing well, I see," Amara said, breaking the silence. "You seem different." The cashier glanced up briefly, her expression softening. "I know," she said, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I remember you. And I just wanted to apologize for how I acted the last time. That was wrong, and I should never have said that to you. It was unprofessional, to say the least." Amara raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sincerity in the cashier's voice. She hadn't expected an apology, especially not so directly, but there it was. A genuine acknowledgement of her mistake. The woman wasn't just apologizing out of politeness, she seemed to mean it. "I've been thinking about it a lot," the cashier continued, her tone earnest. "I was dealing with my own stuff, I guess, but that's no excuse for treating you that way. It was a wake-up call for me, honestly. You don't know someone just by looking at them, and you definitely shouldn't make assumptions. You were right when you told me I don't know anything about you. I'm really sorry for that." Amara stood there, absorbing the apology. She didn't expect this. She didn't expect to feel a sense of understanding, a mutual respect, where once there had only been tension and hurt. But here it was. And, despite everything, she felt a small weight lift off her chest. "You know, it takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong," Amara said, her voice warm but firm. "And I respect that you've owned up to it." The cashier looked up, a small but grateful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I've learned a lot from that day," she said, meeting Amara's gaze. "I'm glad you came back today. I'm glad I got the chance to make things right." Amara felt something unexpected, relief. Not just for the cashier's apology, but for herself, for the healing that had taken place without her even realizing it. Maybe it wasn't just about what happened in that moment weeks ago. Maybe it was about what had happened since, about her own growth, her own journey. The power of standing up for herself had stayed with her, but now, so did the feeling of resolution. "You know," Amara said, smiling as she picked up the bag with her purchase, "I'm glad I came back too." "Thank you." The cashier nodded, looking genuinely grateful. "Thank you, Amara. And I hope you have a wonderful time with your mom." Amara turned to leave, the doorbell jingling softly behind her. As she stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Not just for the gift she had bought, but for the experience that had come full circle. Life had a funny way of teaching you lessons. Sometimes, it was the people you least expected who ended up teaching you the most. And Amara? She had learned that holding on to her integrity was worth more than anything else. It wasn't just about standing up for herself that day. It was about knowing when to let go, when to forgive, and when to give people the space to grow. And she was glad she had. Amara's story reminds us all of the power of standing firm in the face of prejudice. She turned a moment of humiliation into an opportunity to demand respect, not just for herself, but for everyone who's ever been underestimated. It's a lesson in resilience, self-worth, and the courage to rise above. If this story moved you, there's so much more where that came from. Subscribe to our channel to explore more stories that challenge injustice, inspire resilience, and celebrate the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Let's continue to share stories that make a difference, together. Subscribe now.